Welcome to Weirdstale.
Are you a weirdster like us?
Do you love the paranormal, true crime, mysteries, and stories of the just plain weird?
We're sisters, Melissa
and Stephanie.
One of us is obsessed with telling the other every weird story she can find. Every week on our show, Weirdstale, we have a story that's sure to leave you wondering.
You might even let out a welp.
Join us in Weirdstale every Thursday for a new episode of Sisters Speculating on the Strange.
Find us in your podcast app and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Weirdstale Podcast.
And TikTok at Weirdstale Pod.
What's weird with you?
Hi there, welcome to Not Your Average Goat. I'm your host, Tricia Gillespie, and this is a show that celebrates all the shapes, sizes, and colors of diversity as well as adversity. Through authentic conversations, we hope to have an impact on dismantling societal stigma while creating a place for relatable storytelling.
When he was 19 and finishing his senior year in high school, he got hit in the head in the temple, or right by the temple, elbowed. And at school, they didn't think it was a big deal, but it turned out he got the most severe kind of concussion that you could get. And we ended up taking him to a special sports doctor for this. And he had to be out of school and he couldn't use a computer and he had sunglasses on. During this period, about 3 weeks after that, he got myocarditis and pericarditis and almost died of a heart event. He went to my husband and said, something is wrong with my heart. And my husband just put him in the car, took him to the emergency room. No questions asked. My husband says, if Robert tells you something, go for it. Don't question it. And, he ended up in the telemetry unit with, wires all over his chest and then monitoring if there was actual heart damage. And he's still dealing with the ramifications of that being elbowed. Right now, he's getting treatment from a neurologist for headaches that have really never stopped since the initial injury. And for years, neurologists couldn't figure out why this was happening to him. And recently, we found a neurologist in Texas that's a really out-of-the-box thinker who has tried 4 different types of medication on him and just started a whole new protocol that we're hopeful will help him not have unrelenting headaches. So there's a lot of things I learned from being a special needs mom. One is pay attention to and believe in your child. 2, don't think that what people from the outside of your family say or think about your child, like that they're a brat or they refuse to write, when in fact he had undiagnosed birth defects and he was not a brat. He couldn't read or write and is bipolar and has Tourettes. I just shake all that stuff off and am attentive to what's happening with Robert. He is a very self-aware guy because he's had to be, because what the outside world has told him about himself, does not align with his personal experience with life. So again, when we're talking about empathy and compassion, every day, empathy and compassion are a part of my day. Again, it has just taught me to listen better, be empathetic and kind and compassionate towards all different people, in the world. Because if you met Robert, you would just think he was just this, strapping Irish guy and have no idea what the amazing array of hidden disabilities that he has that you cannot see. It has caused me to be, an activist, more like a verbal activist and advocating for the vulnerable or advocating when people make comments about someone who has a special need, maybe enlightening them a little bit about the reality of that situation. So with Robert, it just has never stopped in terms of the events that have happened to him, or the Tourettes being diagnosed when he was a teenager and his eyes started darting left and right and left and right. And he started getting a tick in his head and his head started just ticking. And it was completely involuntary. He had been diagnosed much younger with Tourette's. The physician could see that he had spasms in his muscles, but when it really gets expressed is in teenage years. And I told the doctor about the eye rolling and he didn't believe me. So I videoed it and he was like, oh my gosh. Okay. But they decided not to treat the Tourette's because it's not one of his primary, they can't treat everything. Interestingly, this neurologist that he's seen gave him an anti-seizure med to see if that would work on his headaches. Well, it did not work on his headaches, but it stopped all the spasms in his body that he was not currently being treated for. And he came to me and he said, you know what? I am not having spasms all over my body every day. And I said, you have spasms all over your body every day?
Oh,
And
no.
he said, yes. But, when we agreed what would be treated and not be treated, that was not one of the primary things. I said, okay. And he said, but can I tell you what a relief it is not to have spasms all over my body?
Oh.
I know. And so we went back to the neurologist and he goes, okay, it didn't work for the headache, but we're definitely keeping you on that medicine. It just makes his life easier. And so he's a tough guy.
I'm so glad that, ironically that had that result, because I do recognize, especially when you're dealing with neurological conditions, that there's still a lot of unknown, and medical physicians don't, there's some stuff out there where they can make decisions, but a lot of it is kind of just this trial and error.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly true. And some other neurologists said, well, it's stress. And I said, that is such an interesting observation because he went 19 years without apparently any stress at all. And then he got smacked in the head with an elbow and suddenly he has stress. I just think that's a remarkable coincidence. Don't you? And they didn't know what to say. And the truth is that it's not stress, it's stimulation. When his brain gets stimulated, it causes headaches. And the neurologist that's currently treating him observed, okay, so you had a traumatic brain injury and it is expressing itself as an ongoing migraine. And although it's not a migraine, that's how it's expressing itself. And he was the first physician that was able to really summarize it in a really effective way. And so that's why I have really high hopes that he can, help Robert. But in the meantime, there's something else I just want to talk about Robert, is that he traveled all over the world with Tom and I. When I got pregnant with Robert, I negotiated with my company for him to travel, for my husband and I to travel with me on these trips around the world, because I had seen too many other women that I worked with crying on the phone in Hong Kong because they were so heartbroken and missed their kids. My company agreed to that. And so he started traveling 6 or 7 months old, was his first international trip. So the interesting thing about this is that we had no idea Robert would never learn to read or write or all of the other comorbidities that he has. But I do have a husband that has a history degree and that took Robert to the Taj Mahal, to the British Museum, to the opera, to museums in Holland, to, events in China, and put audio headphones on him at every place that had them. And so the amount of knowledge that Robert was able to receive from the audio phones is really dramatic. And so the fact that if he was dependent on the normal path of reading and writing via a book, he would be very uneducated. But instead, he is quite articulate. Oh, by the way, he didn't have speech either. He couldn't talk. He had speech for 14 years. And he's now really articulate and has a really great vocabulary and is patient if he mispronounces a word and will, practice it. But he has a vast amount of knowledge about the world and a vast amount of experience with the world because he spent his life traveling with us. And we would take him out of school the maximum number of days that we could because he would learn so dramatically on these trips. These were the things that really caused him to learn about life, about taking care of himself, about history, about politics, about cultures, about acceptance. It was these experiences that really informed him.
I'm so glad you were able to give him that experience. And I think it also kind of just speaks to the credibility of experiential learning too, and the tremendous impact it can have on children.
And adults.
And adults.
Really, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. I think experiential learning is amazing. It's very concrete and it hits you in pretty much every part of your being. I'm a big fan of experiential learning. I think, for me, part of understanding the world is having been to a lot of places in the world. And then you're like, oh, you know what? Everyone in the world is the same. Everyone in the world loves their kids and everyone in the world takes care of their parents. And, all of the things that you might think are, about your family or culturally are true everywhere is what my experience is. And, that makes me feel really great, about the world.
Were there ever any times where you or your husband kind of had to do any personal growing? I imagine there, especially because this is your first child and, just
Right.
trying to navigate it. And, I imagine myself, if I had been in this situation, also being a recovering perfectionist, just putting a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect and just, feeling awful sometimes that I can't fix it.
There was a lot of discordance because Tom, did not understand Robert's medical problems because Tom also came from a really big family with a whole bunch of boys and, had a point of view. Tom was the at-home parent and he just really just couldn't grasp what was happening. And it took him a really long time to understand that these were permanent features of Robert. And we would fight about it because I would be different with Robert when I came home from work at night in terms of my play with him because I had started babysitting when I was 12 and I had a lot of siblings that were, girls. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but I just communicated to Robert differently or did play differently than Tom did. And I could see from my experience in babysitting that Robert was not developing the same way that so many other kids that I saw were. And even though the medical professionals that we had couldn't quite keep up with what was happening, I knew for a fact that there was something wrong. And on numerous occasions I've taken pictures or audio recorded stuff to show the professionals, what was really happening. And so it just took Tom some time to understand it. And, I think, I had mentioned to you earlier in a different conversation that when he realized that these were features of Robert, he then really quickly understood him and became, his greatest fan and his greatest teacher and altered how he raised him so that he could be an effective parent and Robert could learn and grow. For instance, Robert took a Taekwondo class, I think in first grade, at a school, an after school thing, and he really liked it. So Tom took him over to Taekwondo to check it out. And I can tell you that Robert is a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo. And Tom fully supported and took him to Taekwondo classes, for, oh my gosh, 12 years, I guess, 12, 13, 14 years. And Robert was in the demonstration team. He can break blocks with his hand, and he talked to parents. He ran the summer camp, stuff that didn't require reading or writing, but required socialization and social skills, and also empathy and compassion. He worked really well with the special needs kids at Taekwondo. And that was something that Tom, saw sparked a light, and made Robert feel really great about. And that because Robert has low tone, he's really crazy flexible. And this was a huge asset. And in Taekwondo, you use primarily your legs, not your wrists. And so the parts that worked with him physically totally fit with Taekwondo. And the fact that he had spent so much time in Asia, felt like home for him to be in the Taekwondo studio. That was just one of the things that Tom did to support Robert and help him with his development socially, and just to mentor him and to be Team Robert. But yeah, and then, to have a special needs kid in teenagers are difficult anyway, but a special needs kid, that is really rough. So we're really happy that's,
behind you.
Yeah. But even to this day, there's certain things I defer to Tom on, or, we will just talk privately about it and have present a single front, because it's really confusing to kids, any child, whether it's a special needs child or not, to have two parents not be on the same page. But particularly a special needs child, parents need to be on the same page. So we, it's just norm for us to discuss issues and how we should handle them, in private, to make sure that if it comes up or when we have to discuss it, we have vetted it and we're both on the same page.
Welcome to Audibly Haunted. I'm your host, Ani Kachadorian. The paranormal is all around us. Sometimes it's the lady in black that haunts your basement, or maybe the dark shadows that lurk out in nature, or maybe places of the past. And sometimes the supernatural, the unexplainable, live within the pages of the books upon your shelves. Here at Audibly Haunted, we dive into different haunted literary works, myths, and folklores every week, simply trying to, make sense of it all. You can find Audibly Haunted on Instagram at Audibly Haunted, and you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Again, welcome to Audibly Haunted. So, let's dive into that.
In 2000, that's when you were diagnosed with your vision disability, retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. By this time, you were pretty well into adulthood. So
Yep.
I'm wondering, were there ever any signs that you had a vision disability before as a child, like in your early adulthood? Kind of, did you just come out of nowhere?
Funny, one time I asked my sister Kathleen, what's it like being a twin? And she said, how would I know? I was born with a twin. I have no idea. And so I feel like it's the same with my vision. I didn't know what other people could see. So I didn't know that I was visually limited for a really long time. My whole life, I didn't have what I understand as night vision. The transitioning from light to dark always was a problem with me. So, and the way that I originally found out that there was something wrong with my eyes was when did an eye test to get glasses for the first time, and I failed the visual field test. And so that started the whole process into actually figuring out what eye disease I had. I knew that at night when I drove, I had a route that I only singularly used, and that I always just, went across roads at lights or stop signs. I never, ever, crossed at intersections where you had to look to the right and to the left, and that I generally would go on side streets rather than highways. So there's a lot of stuff that I just self-accommodated. And, so when they diagnosed it wasn't, did I have a visual impairment? It was really, what was the visual impairment? What was it? What did it mean? What would, happen? And so for me, I was happy to find out that it had a name. Now, since then, we found out that my sister Kathleen has RP. My mom has RP. My sister Sally has RP. And my sister Kathleen's daughter has RP. So our whole family is filled with RP.
You, I think, kind of bring up a really great point that usually, at least from what I've found, that RP is genetic most of the time.
Yes.
That's what I have as well. And my sister has the same condition. I met another gentleman last season who has it, and his sister has it as well. And so, for the longest time, I actually didn't know anyone else who had RP and also had a family member. And it's just been over the last couple of years where I finally realized that, I thought me and my sister were an anomaly, that we were just like weird.
Right. Once I was diagnosed, then everybody started, getting tested and finding out if they had it and bringing it to the attention of their eye guys. My mother actually was just diagnosed, honestly, within the last year, which I think is kind of shocking. But I think that she thought she was a carrier, and her eyesight was not compromised like mine and my sisters and my nieces. And recently, it has become compromised. And, they actually did the test to see, and looked inside of her eyes and saw the webbing, and she actually has RP. So, that was a big surprise to everyone in the family. But yes, I also, until I became really involved in the blind community, where I talk to people with RP all the time, I hadn't met other people with RP. It's, in the sighted community, people are sighted, so they don't have, retinal eye diseases, and they're not chatting about them, or they're not getting on planes and flying around the world and stuff and having retinal diseases. So yeah. And then when I started, doing Blind Girl Designs and going to a lot of shows and being, around a lot of people who are visually impaired, there's quite a few of us that have RP.
So one thing about RP is a lot of people experience the progression of it. I'm wondering for you, when you had, those times where you did have a huge permanent loss in vision, what was that like for you personally? Like, emotionally, did it impact your mental health at all? Kind of like, how did you handle that when it happened?
I had 2 years in a row where I had a big vision loss, visual field loss, and my company was sold by another company, and I couldn't get another job. I mean, I could no longer work in my field because my visual field had, diminished to about 15 degrees. So, to be able to learn and start a new job and be mobile in New York with a white cane was just not real. And plus my eyes hurt all the time during this time period when I was unaware of how fast my visual field was shrinking. When we first moved to Houston, it was a shock at what I couldn't see, and I was crushed and devastated that I couldn't continue my career. I had a streak of self-pity and crying, but eventually I had to get up and stand up and keep moving forward, because that is not the way to solve a problem or to live a life. It's not like I didn't know I had RP. I just didn't expect, this rapid loss of vision and to end my career abruptly. So it was difficult. But then when I decided to start Blind Girl Designs and to tell everyone I was blind and to, start my own business in the fashion field in a slightly different way, it really helped with my acceptance of my visual loss, because I realized so much of what we do is not in our eyes, but it's in our brain. And so much stuff that we do with our eyes can be done in a tactile manner as well, by using our hands or some other parts of our body. Again, continuous journey of learning, new skills and ways to do stuff and to adapt more to my environment. So, now when I fly, when the flight attendant comes and talks to me because I have a white cane, I'll just tell them, I get disoriented in airplane bathrooms. I just want you to know. And as soon as I get to the back of the cabin, if the lights are on in the plane, it's really hard to get lost between two rows of seats on a plane, especially with a white cane. But in the back of the cabin where the galley is, a lot of times it's really dark back there. So I can't distinguish the bathrooms. I have literally no idea what happens when I cross that threshold. So I'll just tell the flight attendants up front, this is where I'm going to be okay. And this is where I'm going to have a problem. And I have to go back to my seat in the pitch dark. I'm going to need some guidance, because there's no possibility with the remaining sight that I have that my eyes are going to be able to transition, to be able to get me back to my seat. So I just, try to be aware of what I can do and what I can't do, and try to enlist help from the people around me that can help me and that are actually there to help.
So you've already alluded to this, but in 2021, kind of in spite of and in a celebration of your RP, you start Blind Girl Designs, your fashion company. How did this venture come about for you? Like, what originally motivated you to start Blind Girl Designs?
So when we came to Houston and I couldn't work and couldn't get employed and was trying to adjust to being on my white cane full time and learning, getting rid of glass jars in my pantry. Mm-hmm. My friend David, who was a designer, the first designer I ever hired in New York, had moved from New York to Shanghai, worked in Shanghai for a few years, and then came back to Houston, which is where he grew up, started a factory in Chinatown. And so when we came down here, he asked me if I would help him work with young designers who needed guidance on how to put together a line and materials and costing and, all the kind of things that you need to grow a business. And I said, sure. I was thrilled to be able to utilize my knowledge. So I started working with him, and kind of unbeknownst to me and completely unplanned, when they would come to the showroom, my cane would be under the table because we'd be seated in a regular area with a white table. And if I was showing them product, it would be on a rack right next to me. And I would have already, rehearsed the presentation, because that's just what you do when you're making a pitch to somebody or teaching somebody. And so one of them asked if I could come to their factory to help the sewers learn how to sew a curve, because they'd only been sewing straight lines. So I told my friend Dave, Dave, I can't go to the factory without my white cane. And he said, you can't bring your white cane. They don't know you're blind. And it really caught me off guard, because I've been using my white cane since 2010, and I thought my white cane was the greatest thing in the whole world, because it allowed me to be independent and not feel like I was just going to flop frontwards on my face because of my depth perception. But in the end, when we got out of the car, I left my white cane in the car and went into the factory without my cane, held onto his arm, and then I had to get parked at a table in the factory, which has lots of saws and moving things and people. And I just, I couldn't be a large part of the conversation because I couldn't move from where I was. And became infuriated in real time, in real life, at the idea that I was a professional with a lot of experience and knowledge without my white cane, but with my white cane, I was not. It infuriated me. So after that, I told Dave that I couldn't work with them anymore. And it took me a few months to kind of formulate it, but it had been in the back of my head for a while that I could have my own company because, I've worked at a lot of different companies. I've done the financial parts. I've done the traveling. I've done the design. I've done the fabrics. And then I worked with David with his domestic company, which, I mostly have international experience. And I felt like I really needed to let people know that I was blind. Like, there was no coming back from this. And there was no, for me, pretending or thinking I was coming back from this. That was just not real. And so I just got up in the morning and just said, you know what? I'm starting the company. It's going to be called Blind Girl Designs. And I'm telling everybody I'm blind. And I immediately went and, set it up. We set up a website. I started producing product and I put it on my LinkedIn and I, engaged my niece who has a master's in, communications and builds websites. She built our website and did all of our social media. She designed our logo and then engaged everybody, my husband and my son and, lots of people to help with, creating the company. And it kind of really just took off from there. And it has been wonderful for me because I've been able to meet loads and loads of visually impaired people since we started the company 3.5 years ago and been on lots of podcasts and, news interviews and all sorts of ways to get the word out on visual impairment and how not to be afraid of it as a sighted person. And sometimes, how a sighted person can be helpful in the presence of a visually impaired person. And I also think that because I travel largely by myself with 2 50-pound suitcases and my white cane for people to see a blind person in action, in an airport. And for me to be forced to ask for help where I can't do stuff, every day is a good humility training experience for me. So the people really liked my product and we just kept listening to what the customers were asking for and creating product that people were asking for. And that's pretty much been our whole MO, was learning from our customers, figuring out what kind of colors are the best colors to do for the blind community and really focusing our product on the blind and blind adjacent community, not like getting all fluffered all over the world, going after everyone. We're really going after this underserved community and all of our t-shirts and hoodies and tote bags have art with white canes on them or braille. So the art itself is blind centric and the company is blind centric. So again, all of this is really uplifting for me as a creator. And I think a lot of people find it uplifting because it just really says, stretch yourself. Don't set boundaries where you don't have to. Don't create obstacles where you don't have to. Be open to the things that can happen in your life that can be really great that you never expect. I never expected to be the CEO of my own company called Blind Girl Designs. That was never part of my plans. but yet here we are. So I think that, I think it's really symbiotic and really positive having this company. And also my son is great selling. He's wonderful doing audio descriptions. But again, he's a really patient guy and he gets it. He can't read or write. So, and it's the same thing. People are not sighted. So they basically have the same kind of response that Robert has. So it's really, easy for him to do audio description and work with, our customers. And it's really nice working with him.
Hi, my wonderful goat friends. Firstly, thank you so much for your support and listening. If you're enjoying this conversation and other episodes of the podcast, I'd like to ask you to please give us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you are listening on right now. And if you're so inclined, we love to hear your feedback in a full review. Also, might be a great idea to hit subscribe on that platform you're listening to right now so you can get notified of new episodes as they are released. Thank you so much again for being one of our loyal GOAT listeners.
I hate that you had a David in your life, but I love that you shared that story because I think it illustrates how the sighted community, I think, in a way, like, cultivates the stigma around visual disabilities, and I hate that you felt kind of confined, and it's so important to acknowledge that there are other Davids out there. I've always had usable sight, and for me, it took me a while to actually start using my white cane because I was afraid of how differently people, like even people who I consider to be friends or family, I was just so afraid of how different they would start treating me if I started using this white cane to tell the rest of the world that I had a disability.
I completely understand that. And people do, some people, it's interesting in the airports, some people will, if I'm going on the escalator, I just had one guy in Denver who came up beside me and quietly said, okay, we're going to step on to the first step right now. And then he rode up like right slightly behind me and he said, okay, we've got about 6 seconds here. You're going to hit the top. He was just a guy.
Yeah.
There are, a lot of people that are not afraid and will come up and ask if I need help or do I need guidance or do I need, help going to the gate. And sometimes I do and, sometimes I don't, but I always thank everyone. And honestly, what I've come to realize by traveling so extensively is that, we are considered kind of a niche portion of the universe with the amount of people that are actually low vision and blind in the United States. Mm-hmm. So a lot of sighted people have never come upon a person with a white cane and they have no idea actually what the white cane means or what they should do around it. And so my point of view now has shifted to, you know what? It's really not their responsibility to understand how to act around a blind person. But I can help them help me by telling them and explaining to them and asking for help. I can break through those barriers so that they feel confident that the next blind and or disabled person, they will approach them again and ask if they need help. I don't want to shut anybody down because I hope that they continue to ask people who are alternately abled if they need help in a mall or a restaurant or an airport. I think that would be really great for the whole world if that was happening. So yeah, there's been a lot of advocacy just by showing up that has happened to me. And I am, really thrilled and grateful for my white cane. It has really enabled me to be incredibly independent. And I'm really grateful that, that it's part of my life.
It's wonderful. I'm imagining that there might be folks who listen to this episode and, kind of hearing your story of you having a vision disability, but then also knowing that you're a fashion designer and just thinking like, how How do you even do that? Because there's so many visual components to design. You have the colors, you have the patterns. And so what would be your response to that?
I can generally no longer print the t-shirts because I just don't have enough visual field to do it. If I need to print a t-shirt, then, I feel it all by hand where it is on the heat transfer machine and fold the sheet in half and feel the top of the garment from my hand down to where I know the print should be, just based on having, done it for all these several years. So, but practically in terms of big projects and printing, for national conventions, I have an assistant designer who is fully sighted who does that. And so the interesting thing is, for instance, I'm in the process of I have a lot of projects for states as well as designs for the summer. Most of the designs are in my head before I put them on paper. And how I actually create prints for garments is I design them in my kitchen, which is all painted white with a gigantic window. And I have a lamp that is meant to light an entire garage on a pole right behind my shoulder. And I have a black table with a white paper, which is the dimension of the print. So I'm actually drawing to the actual specification of the final product. And I will draw a sketch and lay out the dimensions on the paper. And then I have big, bold Sharpies that I use to then outline it and color in the art. But before I draw it in my brain. It's already laid out in my head. Does it need to be 9 by 12.75, 12 by 12? What are the dimensions of it? Where should these elements be in the art? What colors, do I think would work really good? Which types of inks should be on it? And so I do it all in my head because we can and because it's necessary to do that. So the most minimal amount of visual reliance that I can have is really how I do it. And as we go forward and I have less vision, my plan is to continue to create ideas in my head and then verbally describe them to my graphic designer, my son, my assistant designer, and they have sight and they understand the outlook of blind girl designs and the intent of blind girl designs. So I should be able to be totally blind and have the art that's in my head be created by people who understand our brand and what our goals are.
That's so cool. I think that us as blind or low vision people are underestimated for how much we do mentally, creating mental maps,
yes,
doing mental math, doing mental designs.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's easier when you have sight, but it's not, but if you don't, you know what? There's a lot of stuff that you could do. And I think a lot of people, that are alternately abled, they figure out ways to do stuff too that we are like, wow. People ski, people swim, people do all sorts of stuff that, it would be a lot easier to have, arms and legs to do, but can be done, with modifications. So I think it's just being open to having the desire to make it work or to do it, and then being open into how that looks and how that can happen. But I feel like that's how life should look also. Don't have a single point of view about how the direction of life and how it should lay out, because first of all, that's not a reality for anyone. And all it does is create obstacles for growth and creativity.
So you've mentioned that you go to a bunch of conferences, but your niece also created a website for you. So can folks order online your different products?
Yes. We have a website that's blind girl designs with an s.com, and you can just Google or shout at your phone blind girl designs and it will come up. And the first page of our website, and on multiple pages, is if you have some site, is our phone number, which is a live link to our phone. So you can just tap it. And some people like to listen to can see enough to see the images or the descriptions, or listen to the descriptions and then want to call and find out about the sizing, or if we can do it on other colors, or just prefer to give me the credit card information, over the phone. So we get lots of phone orders. So yes, so we have a very active website. We do quite a bit of business on our website, as well as go to a lot of conventions as well. We also do T-shirts for groups, for fundraisers, for states, as well as for conventions. So we're doing a lot of stuff that I think everybody isn't exactly realizing the extent that our business has grown in 3.5 years, because there's a lot of different prongs to it. And in addition, we make dresses and cardigans as well. Yes. And those are big sellers for us as well, in addition to all the T-shirts and the hoodies and sweatshirts.
Very cool. I'm going to have to check out the dresses.
Check out the dresses. Yeah. And the and so now, and we have aprons now, which have been a really big seller. And of course, tote bags with full zip and a zip pocket on the inside. So if you, like me, pick up your bags upside down, nothing will fall out of them. And they'll have a cool blind girl designs print on them.
Well, Tricia, I just have one more question for you. And it's the same question I ask everyone to close out the show. So as you know, the podcast is called Not Your Average Goat, goat being greatest of all time. And I know, I won't hold it against you, but I know you kind of understand sports, being a Chiefs fan. I believe everyone who I bring on this show are just as incredible people as folks like an Abby Wambach or a LeBron James. They're just average people, though. And I want the rest of the world to get to know them. And so that's the meaning behind my show. But equally, I love to ask the folks who I bring on my show, who or what for them is their goat in life? So what is yours?
I think this is a really interesting question, because I find that I see aspects of brilliance in so many people, whether they're famous or not famous, that I have never had a singular idea or person that I thought was the greatest of all time. I feel like every single person has a gift and a purpose in the world, and I revel in being able to learn from them. So I think we're all the greatest of all time.
I love that. I think, kind of true to the theme of our conversation, there's always multiple ways of doing life. There's always multiple points of views. There's always multiple goats.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Well, thank you so much, Tricia, for coming on the podcast. It's been such a joy talking to you. And I've gained, I think, like a new appreciation and insight for the design world. It's just so fascinating and so intricate. I think people like you are so incredible because you go out there and you're bustling around airports just like every other person out there. And I think it might feel so small and minor, but I think it's so important to kind of highlight and for others to see people with disabilities doing quote unquote normal things in the quote unquote normal world, because I think oftentimes there's just kind of this idea of what a disabled person looks like, and that their lifestyle is so different from everyone else's. So I think that that's so great that, from the majority of your life, you are going and you're traveling and, looking at what your son is doing as well.
Thank you. I agree. I think being out there and kind of being, loud and proud, sends a great message to me personally. And I think to the people around me.
Not Your Average Goat is produced and edited by yours truly, with music by Sergey Quadrado and Anton Blazov. All content is copyrighted and should not be recreated, reproduced, or reused without explicit consent. Please visit notyouraveragegoat.org/contact for questions.